Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. Today we're rethinking learning for the AI era. Our guest is Dr. Ashwin Mehta, an AI strategist and organizational futurist who bridges the gap between technology and human behavior. With a PhD in digital learning adoption, Ashwin helps people move from AI experiments to real-world strategy. Hi, how are you, Ash?
Thank you for having me. All well here. Hope you're well as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be really interesting. And we tried to match this talk for a few times. And each time I say, okay, now I have another question for him. So it's better that we met now. So let's start from the beginning. With AI handling information retrieval and knowledge in general, what is the new primary value added in university degree?
So a university degree is, we can partition a university degree into a couple of different things. So the first thing is that we have a baseline of understanding of a domain. So if you do a degree in chemistry, you have a baseline understanding of chemistry. You do a degree in statistics, you have a baseline understanding of that. And it's not necessarily about, can I go and retrieve information? Because we can all nowadays retrieve information. We can work back and forth with web applications that are powered by AI that are very sophisticated search engines. But, and that is not the same as what the agentic revolution is, just to be clear. But what we have in the population is we have a population, generally speaking, that is normally distributed in capabilities. So we have some top performers, some poor performers, and a mean in the middle. And that population, if it is uneducated, if the population does not have a baseline of education, then they are going to struggle with articulating a question, asking a question, knowing what has gone before, figuring out where the white space is and where the gaps are, and ultimately moving us forward in whatever domain that we're in, whether it's a business or whether it's society. So there is still a place for foundational education from schooling all the way through to universities. And universities really need to focus on that as a unique selling point.
So you said one thing is that you need to know the core of your profession or your specific, what is important for you to know for each of these subjects that you learn. But I see university as a place that first you could learn about the role in your career. Where are you going? What could be the options? Or meeting people. Most people would go to university as a buffer for being an adult, more or less. Or just learning things about what does it mean to be a lawyer, for example, because they just know from TV what is a lawyer. So other than these core capabilities, I see more things that are maybe soft skills that people learn, or maybe even doing some kind of training within a workspace in order to know what they're doing. So how do you see that in the context of is it more important now?
So socialization, broadly speaking, is important throughout schooling and university. I agree with that. But exposing people to how work is actually done and what workplaces are and things like procedures and corporate politics and all of these things that come with a business. I don't think universities are, A, I don't think that's the role of universities, and B, I don't think universities are equipped to do that, because no disrespect to the academics out there, but I've been in academia, I've been in consulting, I've been in business as well. Academia is focused on the publication of papers into the public domain, and it is focused on teaching concepts. It doesn't work like a business. They really, generally speaking, are not business people. So I don't think they're well placed to teach students what the world of work is. You can socialize with other students, of course, and you can bounce around ideas and you can figure things out and get to the point where you can articulate a question and have an opinion about things, depending on whether you're doing social sciences or whether you're doing hard sciences. There's a balance in these things. But I don't think the role of university is to socialize people into work. I think that's the role of work. That's the role of businesses to do.
I'm asking that because I'm teaching in a university called Rahman University in Israel, and we had a hackathon of all each of the schools bought their experts, and each one needed to see the vision of what would be the future of their school with AI and what does that mean. And it seems that many of the people said, okay, first, as you mentioned, doing research is not the same. We know that we currently have machines doing research really well, not in everything, but they're doing it faster for sure. And On the other side, teaching could be different because we could use these devices in order to teach differently. And you could do it in a way that is very personal for the student. It could be within his own world and what he understands. So both the part of research and the part of teaching is different, and the world that these people learn to be in 3 years is different. So in all aspects, it couldn't be the same.
So your points about agility, I fully agree that the world of work is moving very quickly, and sitting in one place for 3 years without having exposure to that world is unlikely to be good preparation. But the other side of this, if we focus on the learning side for a second, learning and teaching. So in the old days, and when I say the old days, I do mean like 5 years ago, things have moved quickly, right? So we used to say that we have learning technology, we have digital learning, we have interaction equivalents. So we have learner-learner peer interactions, we have learner-teacher scaffolding interactions, and we might have learner-content interactions. That's reflection, that's critically engaging with the material. And we have these three things, and we would balance these things based on the technologies that we have available. So we had online teaching, we had asynchronous and synchronous interactions between teachers, we had things like marking and feedback of assignments, for example, we had examinations, we had group work, all of the things that we would expect to give this rounded, meaningful learning experience. And with technology, we've always kind of relied on this, how can we be more personalized? And it's not something I agree with, because for many reasons. So reason one is, if we remember the advent of social media and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where social media was able to target ads to people based on what we thought would be most effective for those people. The amount of data that was required to personalize was so huge that in the learning space, in the education space, whether it's a university or whether it's a corporation, we just don't have that level of data about people to be able to personalize things. So the concept of personalization, I think, is a reach, and I think we should talk about customization, but not necessarily personalization.
But
now,
you're
if we
saying
put an
it's hard to reach, but not you shouldn't do it. You're saying it's not applicable, but you could say we need to do it, but we cannot do it. That's what you're saying.
I think we need to customize, but the conversation around personalization is rooted in an unrealistic expectation of what can be delivered by the data that we have. So it's important to match your vision and your goals with the capabilities of the technology and data you have available. Absolutely, if there are learning departments or universities out there that really want to go deeply into the collection of personal data on students or on employees and gather that holistic picture, then we can start to personalize. But then you have issues around data privacy and how are you going to use that data. Now, that's true for digital learning broadly. In the AI space, we have a very different thing. And that is, we have the potential to customize deeply based on the conversations that a person, either an employee or a student, is having with an AI entity. So that is the capture of chats, the capture of voice, of transcripts of voice conversations, and things like that. Now, broadly in the AI space, we're doing that without consent. So if your students in a university are using Copilot, ChatGPT, using Gemini or something like that, and they're having these text chat or voice chat conversations, broadly, are they consenting for the university to capture all of those conversations and do either thematic analysis, content analysis, semantic analysis, sentiment analysis on those transcripts for the sole purposes of producing a personalized data set against which you can then do learning interventions? And I don't think I've seen any university or corporation explicitly get that consent from employees or from students. So if we're not doing that, then we're already kind of obfuscating or being unclear about what our intentions are with the AI machine. So this is point one on personalization, is simply about the data. We need to collect sufficient quality and quantity of data with informed consent. I don't think that's happening. The second thing is, back to what I said about having a broad base of information and knowledge that we can call your domain expertise. We go very deeply into this conversation about personalization and, what does the student want? What does the student prefer? What modalities should we be using? I don't know about your age. I'm old enough to have been to university where none of that mattered, right? You went to a lecture, you went to a place where somebody who was an expert had said, these are the things that you need to know if you want to have a broad base of understanding of this particular topic. And for the next 12 weeks, we're going to go through all of these things. Some of it will be lectures, some of it may be practicals. I did chemistry. Some of these things might be work that you need to do alone. You might need to go to the library. You might need to research things. But this is it. This is what you need to go and do. And the conversation wasn't about personalization. It wasn't about what the students want. Because frankly, as a teacher, I don't think we should care about that. We should care about the outcomes. And that is that these students have this broad base of domain understanding. And the more we talk about personalization, for me, it's almost a weakness in the teaching profession to say we are treating learning as a commodity. These are customers and we need to prioritize customer satisfaction because they are fee-paying customers. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the same as having, the old way of what I just described, whereas you want to know these things, this is what you must know.
I agree with you that in many cases, even in my university, we have these discussions of these students need to comply to these types of rules, or they need to be good enough in these topics, and we cannot be too nice and see them as customers. I totally agree with that. But when I'm thinking about personalization, it could be even for a 8 years old student learning language with the topics that they like. So if my kids would get an essay about, Pokemon, it will be more interesting for them, and they still learn grammar while reading, right? So that's one thing, because it's more close to them. When I'm thinking about the topic, you cannot change chemistry because I don't understand parts of materials, okay? So you wouldn't change the domain and the knowledge, but you could change the way that I learn. So maybe you could do it sometimes from an audio or a video, or just make it more accessible to me as a person, because I prefer to see images while I'm learning, or I want to capture the data in a way that would summarize it differently than others. That's what I'm saying. You couldn't change the domain, just the way that I could learn.
Yeah. And the literature is not really support this, right? Because the concept of learning styles has been widely debunked in the literature. Not the concept of learning styles, but there has not been a study that has proved that if you match somebody's learning style with the intervention modality, that you would get a superior outcome than if you didn't match their learning style to learning modality. So broadly, what I think where we're going with this is, if we take it to the AI space for a second, we have the potential for multimodal responses. What you're saying is, if we were to have some kind of database, a vector database, for example, where we can use retrieval augmented generation against a curriculum to say, the learners are going to ask for anything, but it has to be rooted in this curriculum. By the end of this, they must know everything that's in this database. And that's the point at which we could say learners could then ask, I want to understand material science based on the outer skin of Pokemon, right? Now, as a pull, so if we think about learning modalities being effectively push, pull, and share. So we have in the push space, universities and corporations will say, these are the materials you need. Push them didactically towards the objectivist concept of learning. The other way is for learners to pull. They go to the library, they maybe look on the internet, they look at materials that they're curious about. And then the other part is share, social learning. Now, if we think about the pull side of this, what we're talking about right now is the concept that a learner could pull information from an AI entity. I'm not calling it an agent deliberately because it's not an agent. We're talking about web applications that effectively assist in natural language responses. But a learner, whether it's a corporate or a university, could pull information from this entity and say, I want this as a picture, or I want this as a video, or I want this in the style of a manga comic book, for example. And we're approaching the technology level where that can happen. There are still some errors, but yes, that can happen. But that's, to me, that's distinctly different from the concept that universities or learning departments can personalize learning, because that's the didactic push side, and that's the thing that requires data. The pull side is very rich in the AI space because learners can pull whatever they want. But in your example, how much do you know that your children like Pokemon versus how much do you know that all children probably like some kind of Pokemon or comics or something like that? Because that is persona-based targeting versus personalization, which are different things.
Yeah. So I would say that a teacher, if she's really good, she would know how to get the attention and maybe teach differently to different kids, especially if she doesn't have like 40 of them in the class, let's say. And we could take the best teacher ever and understand what is the essence of a good teacher, and maybe have some of these capabilities to an AI entity. That's one thing. But if you could, in this pool thing, get the collaboration with the student that says, okay, right now, this is in my mind. And especially in things that maybe in science it's less relevant, but maybe it is. So if I'm just, I don't know, seeing a fiction movie and it's related to science, I don't know, something like that, maybe. But the fact that we could, I'll give you an example. We have essays that like were invented like, I don't know, 40 years ago, and all my kids learned it's a very boring essay, the same one. Everyone learned it. It's because it has, all the grammar that is in place. Now there is no limitation to create any kind of text and any kind of image and any kind of video even, just to teach me exactly what I want. So I'm thinking that this is a very big gap from the future that, teachers came, they built this curriculum, they took it for many years after to their students. It's the same, even the books did not change, right, until they print the book, and then it's like math didn't change. It's the same math, right? But still, it's like it's not changing, and education should be, as you said, it should be versatile, it should be learning and open-minded. And instead, I feel that they're so left behind. So it's like this is a really big opportunity for them to do something which is relevant for the students, that their attention, by the way, it's much shorter than what was in my age, I would say.
Yeah, but if this is a consequence of how we behave, and we as educators are always doing this thing, which I don't agree with, which is how can we capture their attention? How can we make sure that we are relevant to them? We must avoid them doing the thing which is just reading the material. Sit there quietly for 2 hours and read this book, read this essay. It might be boring, but life sometimes is boring, and you need to learn how to do things that maybe you don't enjoy. We're not here to constantly entertain the next generation, because if we do that, then their attention spans are going to suffer, and we're not producing rounded individuals that are emotionally resilient, that can actually sit in a corner for 2 hours quietly and not have to be constantly entertained. And our approach as educators, our approach as teachers in schools, our approach as parents, generally speaking, over the last probably 20, 30 years, has caused a generation now which has a very short attention span. And things like social media, of course, contribute to this. But as educators, we need to make a decision. And I think the decision has gone the wrong way, but I think the decision is, are we going to chase the generation, try to entertain them and try to meet them where they are? Or are we going to produce rounded, intelligent individuals that have resilience that can contribute to society? They seem to be different things, because everything that you've just said, yes, this is the modern education approach. How can we introduce games? How can we introduce videos? How can we make them play with each other? How can we do absolutely everything in our power to avoid them having to sit silently for half an hour and critically engage with the primary literature? It seems like we're breeding weakness in the education system. What do you think?
I understand what you're saying, because I see education a bit differently than like the way you're saying, okay, we need to teach them that sometimes you need to read a book. Just read the book. That's it. And you cannot just play a movie instead of like reading it. You need to really read it. And it's not the same. It's not the same. So I totally agree with you that sometimes students need to do hard things. That's for sure. On the other side, the strict system of education in many Western countries, it's not different, is like, let's take these kids, put them in a class, they will sit for 6, maybe 8 hours, and we would just shove information into their mind because they need to understand some kind of concept that somebody said that they are most important for their lives. And as we grow, we see that in many cases they are not that important for most of our lives. And some of we need to know reading, right? But I'm not sure I need to know everything that I learned in 12 years of school, right? I guess that you agree with that. So I'm trying to understand what would be to make them curious and interested. It's not like petting them and saying like, yeah, it's like, it's too hard to read, let's just view a video. No, that's not what I'm saying, right? I'm saying that
Yeah.
they need to be engaged. And if not, we're teaching someone just to be passive instead of like interested and curious. That's what I'm saying.
So I kind of agree, right? Because I think by placing the onus, the locus of control, the responsibility onto the teacher, we are automatically teaching people to be passive. Because we have, as I said, we have a population that has a distribution, and we have people who are curious, people who are going to experiment, people who are going to search for the information, people who are going to go into those places where we need people to go so they can maintain the momentum of technology, the momentum of progress that our society depends on. And as in the education system, we need to stimulate that kind of thinking. Stimulating that kind of thinking is going to be a difficult thing. And it's going to be a mixture of, it's going to be a mixture of teaching. It's going to be a mixture of teaching strategies, learning strategies, and other, influences from society, from parents, and all of these kinds of things. It's a tricky one, and this is why I say I kind of agree, because we want folks to have a broad base of education, and not everything that we learned in school is immediately and directly relevant to our lives. But it gave us an understanding of things, a shared understanding, a common understanding, which means that we know that we are now, for example, we're having a conversation that is mediated by technology. It's we're doing this online. We have cameras, we have lights. We know what a light is. We know it's the emission of a certain frequency. These kinds of things should be shared understanding that we all have. And if we don't teach these concepts, even if it's not directly relevant, we don't teach these things in schools, then we don't have a society that has a shared understanding. So this broadly is the function of the schooling system. But it does depend on the outcome being that we have folks, adults, who are curious and able to take that step without having to be taught. And this is the paradox of teaching. We want to teach people to fish, I think, rather than give people fish and expect that they would be constantly stimulated by that.
Yeah, but when we're talking about like young kids, okay, we're learning something which is like common, and we need to learn something that is like, that's life, that's the basic of like, just to understand the world more or less. But when we're talking about students in universities, we're preparing them for their career, for their jobs. And in that case, it's even more critical that the academic education would be very up to date and relevant.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're not changing math and physics if you want to be a physics, a researcher, but you would change the way that you perceive, law and even medicine. We're not changing the human body, but the way that we understand things, or the way that we operate, or what we're doing in medicine in general could change. The profession would change. And I don't see it, at least in my university, I would say, I'm not seeing like teachers all the time being curious, what's new, what could we make a bit different, other than the basics. We have to understand the core of the human body if you want to be a doctor. Okay, so we agree with that. But it's like, it's not relevant in many cases to the real world. And that's the purpose of university, right? So we cannot just say it's like second grade. Now we're paying tuition, which sometimes is kind of high, to go to work somewhere. So how do you see that in the aspects of being AI, even taking the jobs afterwards? It's like we have to teach them to be relevant. If not, what would they be?
So there's an element of relevance in AI anyway, right? So if people are at university and they're using AI on a daily basis, most likely they are still just software users. In the old days, we used to say, go Google something, right? Or you
Right.
might go to, in the academic space, you might go to Scopus or PubMed, or you might go to Google Scholar or something like that and do a specific search on something. That's a web portal, that's a web browser, it's an interface that you go and use. And using a Copilot or a GPT is no different. It's basically a web portal. You go and type some things in, and some
Right.
things come back at you. So how much more or less skilled are we really expecting people to be in university if that's what they're doing? If you're in a technical discipline and you're building things, you're coding, you're building orchestration, you're deploying systems, of course that is very, very fast moving. In the space of something like medicine, we would expect that the ability to do clinical research would be vastly accelerated, because now you can be aggregating data from lots of databases, you can be looking at observational data in a very different way, and you can be targeting new molecules and new medicines in a very different way. So these, we have genome mapping. All of these things lead us towards a space where the tech is changing how things are done in certain areas. But in other areas, medicine's a great example. If we think about the training period for a doctor, once they have become a medical doctor, so that's a professional doctorate, and they are then qualified or licensed in some way to go and practice medicine. In most countries, they don't just go and practice medicine. They then go into a hospital, they'll do some kind of junior internship, and they will be inducted into the ways of working in the profession. And that will take a couple of years of observation and mentoring and coaching and practice and signing off different procedures before they can then be qualified effectively, professionally qualified, to go and do these things on their own, and then eventually go into practice, etc. So there's quite a career path there. And that's a really good example. Law is another example where you have that formality, where you have the transition from university to the world of work. And that is to some degree augmented or supported by the technology capabilities that we have in the AI space. In law, there are a lot of things that are around surfacing regulations or case law very, very quickly. You don't have to go and read thousands of documents now. So you have these different aspects, but they're coming from the world of work. And I guess the thing we're debating is you have university, you have work, you have a transition between the two. And
Yeah.
where should the responsibility be for saying, well, this is how technology and AI is being used in the workplace, which is slightly different to how it's being used in education, because how it's being used in education is really about content development, multimodal content development, static or dynamic content development, which is the AI question. So if we say, I want this and I want it as a video.
Right.
And then we have the surfacing of cursory information. So that is, I don't know this thing, but I have an idea. Can you talk it back and forth with me so I can sharpen my idea? And that's using the AI entity as a partner, as a coach, as a mentor, as a brainstorming partner, or a team member, or something like that. So we have these different ways we could use the machine, the synthetic workforce, the synthetic teacher. And all of these ways are available to us. I guess probably the question for you is, how much of this is used in a university setting? Because those three things are available certainly in the workplace for adult learning, and a lot of these things are also available with more guardrails in the schooling population. In the university sector, I pretty much guarantee that in every Western university certainly, and it's true in India as well, that every student has got a phone in their pocket that has multiple AI entities, GPT, Gemini, etc., available to them, and they use them all the time. They use them in voice. They're just wandering around campus and talking to them. So the question then becomes, to what degree is that sanctioned by faculty versus to what degree is that effectively what we call in the business space, we call a shadow AI. So people are using it, but it's not really supported or endorsed by the business. So how is it working in the university sector?
I think that there is one thing of how do you use these devices, and how do you change the way that you interact in this kind with a teacher or someone who is learning with you, or worker, co-student. That's one thing. And the second thing is like, how is life after is changing, the fact that we need different things or different kind of roles or and people in order for them to have a job. So the first thing is like, many of the things that we're doing in university would be relevant for the context of work, right? If we're researching for university or researching as we need to deliver something competitive market research. Okay, so it's the same thing, but the way that we teach is not always fit to create the right adult in the workforce if the workforce is changing. Because one thing we could say, okay, some of the professions would probably change, or we would need less workers as lawyers, for example, right? And maybe
Yeah.
we would need less people doing accounting or banking. Doesn't matter. So we need to think about what are the qualities that the people need in order to have a way to find a job or to do something new. So if we talked about curiosity or doing things differently or being more entrepreneurial in what you're doing, and you mentioned that this some of it is like a talent that you're born with, and some of it could be taught and maybe encouraged while you're teaching. It seems that these qualities of learning yourself, being curious, being entrepreneurial, finding your way, balancing yourself within several tasks or several options, these are not things that the educational system, even if you're a student and you're 21 already, nobody's like thinking about these changes. And I think these are the critical ones, not the part of using the current AI that will change in like, in a few months and a few years for sure.
So, first of all, let's just be very clear, everybody listening out there, if you're going to be offended by this, please be offended quietly. But not everybody in the world of work is the most highly intelligent, most curious, most experimental pioneer of the future.
I agree.
There's a whole spread of people, right? So we need to account for that somehow. There are things happening in the world of work. So I'll give you the example. So for me, 2026 is the agentic revolution, agentic readiness. That's a very different thing from AI readiness and AI deployment. Because in one hand, you have software as a service, which people use. So you would say, I'm going to invest some money. People are going to use this particular thing. We expect these outcomes. In the agentic space, you're not even talking about adoption because you don't have people using these systems. The systems are autonomous. They're executing productive tasks and activities themselves with human oversight. And the skill set required to do that is very different because you have the technical skill set where you need to build these things. You have the orchestration skill set. Which of my business processes am I comfortable with devolving to machines? Where do I need oversight? Where do I need monitoring? And then you have governance and how quickly can I shut something off if it's running away with some decisions. Decisions and actions cost money, basically. And then you have the concept of effectively a puppet master. So how are people at the top of a pyramid of multiple agents and a multi-agent hierarchy, how are people able to effectively run an entire department with all of the synthetic workers that they have with them? And that becomes a hybrid workforce. Now, everything that I've just said is 2026, it's brand new stuff.
Right.
If you're in a university and you are right now in January, February 2036, you're saying, right, we're going to write a syllabus and a curriculum for something that we're going to launch in September. It's going to be a 3-year program. There is no realistic way that you could cope with everything that I've just said that's going to happen in 2026. By the time we hit September, the syllabus and curriculum that you make right now will be out of date.
Right.
And this is the reality of what universities are struggling with. So the concept of can a university adequately prepare students for the world of work that's going to be in 3 years' time? The answer probably is going to be no if we say that they need to be specifically prepared with certain skills or the ability to execute certain tasks and activities. But if we were to say we need a broad base of domain information, curiosity, and these kinds of things, these kinds of skills, that's way more realistic for a university to achieve. And this is why I think that's more important.
So in some cases, you would say that you would not advise people to go to university if you're not preparing for their real life. Let's say they're not doing like, physics or being a doctor, diplomacy. Let's take something like
Yeah.
that. So if we don't believe the university would prepare them in 3 years to the workforce, in some cases, maybe it's not the right choice.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. It's not something I agree with, but I can see that that's a perspective that people
So
will
why don't
have.
you agree with that? If you're learning 3 years and not getting in the end to a point that you could earn your just make money and live. So why would you do
Yeah.
that? I'm not talking about being a doctor, a lawyer, or accountant.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put that aside.
Why would you do that? So for me, I don't see a university degree or any of this as an end point. It's part of a journey, and that journey needs to include basic understanding and knowledge development and some measure of skill. It needs to include the tactical things as well. So this is the things that you would learn in the first 2-3 years of your work. And folks who are coming out of university, if you're watching this, don't come out of university and then say, I'm going to do a job for 6 months and another job for 6 months. Because I know it's tempting to do that, but I think if you're in one place for 6 months, how much did you really learn? You need a sustained period of time to pick up the basics. And for me, I think that university experience and the university qualification, because a qualification is also important, demonstrates that you can learn things, you can sit down and read things, you can be examined on those things, you can perform under pressure, you can perform to deadlines, you can produce something which is probably a dissertation or a synthesis of what you've learned and a synthesis of what you've done. You can go and structure your way around a problem and you can potentially solve that problem. These are basic things that pretty much every degree will give you, irrespective of the domain. And then the things that we've talked about over the last half an hour or so are the things that you learn in the world of work, which I don't think necessarily are going to come from a university, but the university is the precursor to learning those things. And then as you move forward, you gain experience and you will work on client projects and you will work on maybe internal projects, and you would have the experience within your domain of not only solving problems but coping with errors, because things break. And most of the domain experience that you have in a workplace is around this concept, well, that thing broke, how did I fix it? And there's a concept in some businesses that says, well, if you're a good manager, you can just go be a manager of anything. Generally, that's not true. That's a very bad idea, because you don't have this domain history of solving problems and fixing mistakes, and that's vital. But to me, it's a journey, and you need both aspects. You can't just drop people into work and say, go for it, learn everything that's brand shiny new, we've got all this tech, just play with it, you'll be fine, without having that baseline of understanding. So I think university is very important in that trajectory of development.
I see. Okay, there is another thing that, and we're almost done with time, so there is one thing that I wanted from the beginning to talk about, and you researched the cognitive cost of AI. And
Yeah.
we know that everyone is using it, for sure, young people. So tell us more about that.
So there are a couple of different cognitive costs. So if we think about hierarchy, taxonomy, we have individuals, we have group level costs. At an individual level, we have things like neuroplasticity. We go and adapt as people. We adapt very quickly to new stimulus, new environments. We make connections with data, and generally this is how our brains work. What we have seen to some degree has been supported by a couple of early studies, is that when people are using, and everybody talks about ChatGPT, let's not focus on that. There are multiple tools out there. It's about how you use it rather than what you're using. So if you're having a conversation like we're having now, we're going back and forth over some concepts, you're questioning and I'm forced to think, I'm saying some things, you're forced to think. And this helps us to make connections with the material, with each other. This is basically the concept of social learning. Now, when we go back and forth with an AI entity, we should be doing the same thing. And that stimulates us to think. And the concept in education was scaffolding. So we are supported by a more knowledgeable other, that is the AI entity that has access to all of this data, and they're able to tell us things that maybe we didn't think of this particular perspective. I had 7 things and I should have thought of 8. The 8th one came to me from this AI agent. And that's a way of brainstorming, that's a way of improving and elevating your thought process. The other way is, previously I had this work to do, this task to do, this activity. I needed to produce this essay, I needed to write this report, I needed to analyze this data. And that would have previously required me to engage my brain with the materials and think of a way to synthesize findings and then communicate those findings. And for the people who are devolving all of that to the AI entity, saying, here are my inputs, give me the outputs. And then without even looking at the outputs, they just take those and give them to whoever they were supposed to give them to. In that space, what we have is almost a full shutdown of thought process. And if we have the full shutdown of thought process on a regular basis, a daily basis, with every task and activity that we are supposed to do, then it should not surprise anybody that we then atrophy in the skills, the cognitive skills that we should have been using on a daily basis, and we are no longer doing that. So that's the individual level impact. The group level impact, whether it's a society or an organization, the longer term loss of discriminatory capability. So we've seen this all across social media, I'm sure, but as we're presented with more and more poor quality, poorly thought out information. And by that I mean, I've asked for a response. Whatever the first response was, I've taken that and used that as an output. That now proliferates through the entirety of a system. And you have organizations where the employees are looking at misinformation, they're looking at deepfakes, they're looking at lots of different types of content. And eventually they're either unable to say this is real and this is fake. They're not used to going to scrutinize the references and figuring out if this is something that makes sense, broadly speaking, in the context of the domain information that I have, or they're just desensitized to it and they just don't care because of there's so much information out there. So we have group level and individual level effects cognitively.
Yeah, I think that when we want to really understand something and really grasp the ideas within a text or something that we need to understand, we need to go through some kind of a process to digest it and in order to really grasp the essence of an idea. And once we're just asking a question and then getting it like, somebody cooked it for us already, we don't have any process in our mind just to really think what is the meaning of something. And my second degree is in cognitive science. And I always was very interested in learning, but in cognitive science, you have attention, you have memory, you have it's all divided. But when you're learning, you're using everything all together in order to make sense of something in your mind. And for me, as I see kids just interacting with something, first, they don't have any way to really think critically about what they're getting. Sometimes it's not the right thing to say, right? It's not the truth. That's one thing. And second is what do they really get? What is the sense that they're getting if they're not working with it? And it's already prepared and they didn't do any work, in the past, people wrote, and I'm still writing when I want to learn something or to remember and retrieve something, because it's using my hand, and people don't use pens anymore, they're all clicking. And I think it's not the same. But even taking it one step further, you're not using a pen, you're not even typing, you're not reading for sure, you're just getting it ready and done. So what does that mean? It means that the AI knows it, but I'm not sure I know it. I just read it for now, and then it will go. So I think that's
there's a lack of cognitive work, and certainly in Western societies, that means people are pivoting more towards emotional work, right? So the politics of offense and all of these things that, we have a less emotionally resilient society because now cognitive work has declined. So we have other things.
Yeah.
Because people will find a way to fill their time.
Altogether.
Right?
The first lesson I learned, attention, he said, we're not talking about emotions. We're talking about cognition. It's the first thing he said. And then while you divide it in your mind, there is nothing related to the thoughts and emotions. It's it's all divided. No, it's not divided. It's all together, and we're one human being, and it's just trying in the academy to dissect things. But I think that the essence of what we're saying is that it might be too easy sometime, and that it's not demanding enough in order to create a human being that really understands things deeply or complexities in the world even. And if we're just saying, okay, you get an answer, it's so easy, so what is like the value of what you're bringing as a student or as a worker afterwards, if you don't really do the hard work of learning,
Yeah.
understanding, digesting, and analyzing the data itself? But who knows, maybe they'll get other capabilities. I know what they are. What do you think?
I mean, this is the tricky question for society. That if machines can do all of this stuff, and we used to hear this the last couple of years, we heard this quite a lot on LinkedIn, where people would say, "Well, AI is here to augment humans, and people are going to be doing critical thinking and problem solving and using their judgment and all of this stuff." All of these things that people are basically really bad at. If we take population distribution. So what could people be doing? And we're now in a tricky situation where most model capability, regardless of the model, most of them are very, very good at problem solving, critical thinking, all the things we thought would be human things. And they're surpassing humans in these different domains. It brings us to this question, which is what's the purpose of the human in all of this? What will we be doing in work, and why therefore are we learning or going through a schooling system or going through a university system to do what? And we don't really know, because the future of certainly knowledge work is likely to be heavily agentic. The future of manufacturing, engineering, groundwork, construction, all of these things is likely to be heavily robotic, supported by AI and heavy machinery. So with these things being very likely in the future, we have then the other thing, and there are films about this, like Equilibrium, for example, is a film in this kind of dystopian vein, where we say, well, what do people focus on? And people focus on either following the rules and being emotionally stoic, or they focus on self-actualization, enlightenment, art, music, culture, society, relationships, all of these things which we could focus on. And they're all worthwhile things. They're just not the same as the tasks that we currently do in the workplace. So that means there needs to be a change. If that's the route we go down, then we need to be comfortable with that change. And mostly in most, certainly Western societies, maybe also Eastern societies, the concept of pay scales for these different types of work, the arts, humanities, the cultural side of things, tends to be paid very poorly compared to sciences and software development and tech and all of these things. So we'll need to readdress some of these things. But ultimately, yeah, what is the role of the human, and therefore why do we need cognition or affect? Which these are big questions.
Yeah, yeah. It's like opening another discussion each time in our mind, but we're almost done. So what would be like the most important thing students and educators need to know about the AI era that we didn't discuss till now?
So the two most important things are that there are AI technologies out there which you can use to learn to do. It's very important. The do part is very, very important, because we are at an unprecedented place with technology where you can go and learn how to build software. You can go and do it with basically free tools, and you can go build a company if you really want to. There aren't really any limits to what you can do, but you have to have the work ethic, the understanding of information and where to get it, the ability to ask questions, the ability to solve problems. And these things are not things that come easily. So hard work is still required, but hard work is required in a different space. That's the AI space. The agentic space is we have a synthetic workforce that can do things for us. What we need as human beings is to figure out what they're going to do. That's a strategic level of thinking, which is slightly different from what I said about the AI space. So I think these are the key messages that universities need to, students and lecturers need to be on board.
Yeah, interesting. So thank you, Ash, for your time. It's been really like we thought about things together and enjoyed our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to our listeners. And if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and share it. And we'll meet in another episode in about a week. So see ya. Bye bye.